Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very special Law Day webinar of the Task Force for American Democracy. I'm Mary Smith, president of the task force and a past president of the American Bar Association. Today is Law Day, and this year we are also celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. This anniversary is a significant milestone that invites reflection on the nation's journey and ongoing work to build a more just society. This year's Law Day is a pivotal occasion to honor the legal profession's role. President Eisenhower established Law Day in 1958, and in doing so, he issued the following statement. The world no longer has a choice between force and law. If civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law. Law Day is a significant observance that highlights the importance of the rule of law and the role of judges in upholding it. Judges play a crucial role in the legal system by ensuring that the law is applied equally to everyone. Law Day serves as a reminder of the dedication and commitment of judges to uphold the rule of law and the principles of justice that underpin our democratic society. So today, we are honored to be joined by three esteemed former judges who are all members of the Task Force for American Democracy. First, we have Judge Nancy Gertner, who is a member of the task force and a former judge on the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts. We also Judge Thomas B. Griffith, and he's a former judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And last but not least, our co-chair of the task force, Judge J. Michael Ludig, and he's a former judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. So hello, all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll start with you, Judge Ludig. Why is Law Day important?
Well, Mary, thank you for doing this webcast on this Law Day, May 1st, 2026. We are celebrating here in America the 250th anniversary of our founding on July 4th, 1776. And for 250 years, America has been the envy of the world and the beacon of freedom to the world because of its democracy and its rule of law. In America, we are ruled by law, not by men. 250 years since that founding, America's rule of law is in peril for reasons that we all know. And that makes this Law Day 2026 arguably the most important law day in all of American history.
Well, and Judge Gertner, did you want to add on anything about why Law Day is important?
Well, when you look at the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence with its list of grievances against an authoritarian king is the template, is the model for what we were trying to avoid and not do. In other words, this was an absolute government that had trod the rights of the natural rights and the protected rights of individuals in the United States. And that was what we stood for then and now. And the Law Day was created to some degree to announce our difference from a totalitarian state, and particularly announce our differences from the Soviet Union, and to really tout the freedom and liberty of individual citizens. So it's terribly important to both use that as part of the celebration of the Declaration of Independence and going forward even when it's not the 250th anniversary.
And Judge Griffith, I was going to ask you, do you think Law Day holds particular significance this year?
I do for a number of reasons. First of all, let me say how honored I am to be on this webcast with you, Mary. You're a great and inspiring leader, and thank you for what you're doing to preserve and protect democracy. and both Judge Ludig and Judge Gertner are good friends. Each of us was appointed by a different president. My guess is when we went into the ballot box, we probably voted for different people at different times, and yet we all wore the black robe and took the oath of office to be impartial. I'm confident we did that, and so it's an honor to be here with them. I spent a formative period of my life in South Africa during the darkest days of apartheid. I've spent a good deal of time in the former countries of the Soviet Union. And law day is important because the rule of law works. No, it's demonstrated empirically. We can show that countries that are committed to the rule of law, their citizens prosper, their citizens flourish. They have a sense of freedom, a sense of optimism about the future. They have a sense that they're treated fairly. And in our country, that has always been our aspiration. We've never fully reached it, and we've got much work yet to do, but we've never given up on the idea that we, as Judge Ludig said at the outset, this is not a government of men and women just deciding what they want done. It's a government, it's a government of laws where we, the people, get together and through our elected representatives decide the rules by which our society is run, and then we apply those rules as best we can, fairly and impartially. And we've discovered in the last 250 years that when we do that, we do really well. When we slip away from that, we don't do so well. So I think the 250th anniversary is a time to say, well, good start, right? No, good start, well done, but it's not finished. And what we learned in our experience is in the best of times, the rule of law is a fragile possibility. We're not living in the best of times. And so therefore, it's all the more important that we redouble our commitment to living by law and not by allegiance to party, not by allegiance to an individual or a political leader, but to law.
Yeah, and that is so true. And Judge Gertner, I wanted to ask you, one of the things we're told, and I actually think is true, is that when you use phrases like the rule of law, or when you say things like constitutional order, ordinary Americans kind of tune out. That's not really something that gets them motivated. How do you convey the importance of the rule of law to people who are not lawyers?
I think one of the things that you say is that no man or woman is above the law, that we're bound by rules that are established in advance, that are not changed to fit whoever is the person to whom it's applied, that they're promulgated by our representatives, that we know what they are, that they're clear, and that we are bound by it. And to take the point from Judge Griffith, that essentially we can govern our lives, we can predict our lives because the laws are predictable. Businesses can govern their lives because the laws are predictable, unchanged, not by an individual, and that it therefore promotes our benefit and our health and welfare as well as that of the society at large. And then you contrast that with countries in which there is no rule of law, in which the law is determined by the president or by the king, that you have no role in making it, that it can change depending upon the moods of the leader, where you can't plan, where you can't count on the government. It seems to me we know what the rule of law's opposite is, and we know how we have lived, even in an imperfect union, over the past 250 years.
Well, I think weakening of the rule of law in the United States in recent years. In fact, the World Justice Project, which ranks rule of law around the globe, ranks the United States 27th out of 143 countries. Griffith, do you agree that there's a weakening of the rule of law in the United States?
So I don't know the metrics that they used, but that it seems like it to me. It seems to me that our past commitment to the rule of law is weakening, and And I see that primarily in social science research that talks about how young people view democracy. Does it work? How young people view our system of government. Does it work? And increasingly, their answer is no, it doesn't work. And increasingly, this same social science research shows that there's an attraction towards autocratic government, to the strong leader who takes control, and that's becoming a more attractive option to particularly to many young people. And I find that very worrisome. You know, the success of the rule of law, I think, is beyond dispute. If you look at the world today, those countries in which the rule of law exists are not only more prosperous, their citizens are not only living more flourishing lives, but people from around the world want to go there. Right now, I don't want to wade into a debate about border control and immigration stuff, but where are the countries to which people are trying to gain access? You know, communist China doesn't have an immigration problem. Russia doesn't have an immigration problem. We do, and other countries that are dedicated to the rule of law do. So it really, the proof is in the pudding. People want to come to countries where you're treated impartially, where you're safe, and where you can flourish. And those are all byproducts of the rule of law. You take the rule of law away, and you end up with societies that people don't want to live in.
Judge Ludick, what do you think are the biggest threats to the rule of law in the United States today?
Mary, what I first wanted to say is that, as Judge Griffith suggested, over the 250 years of our history here in America, there has been times of lesser and greater commitment to the rule of law. For instance, around the time of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln had said, actually 20 or 30 years earlier in 1838, that there was a need in America for there to be a revival around the rule of law. And as he said, America should let the Constitution and the rule of law be the political religion of America. That was then. And I believe personally that we need that same kind of revival to the Constitution and rule of law here in America, whatever, 150 years later. And again, it would be prophetic timing, if you will, from the founding to the Civil War to today. We would have had two needed revivals to the rule of law in America.
Well, I know you brought up President Lincoln and another famous speech he gave to the Young Men's Lyceum. He was talking about the survival of our country, the survival of our republic, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said that if destruction be our lot, then it will be death by suicide, meaning that any threats to our country, the biggest threat would not come from external forces or other countries, but from within. Do you agree with that, Judge Ludick?
Yes, I do. And I didn't answer your first question, and I will now. The threat today to the Constitution and rule of law, as well as to our democracy, is from within, not from without. And this was precisely the danger that Abraham Lincoln spoke about in that speech to the Men's Lyceum when he was 29 years old. So the danger from within has now come, and we Americans must respond, and we lawyers in particular, are uniquely qualified, but also uniquely obligated to respond by defending and supporting our Constitution and rule of law. We lawyers are the only profession that takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, just like our federal public officials do. Well, the time of testing in America has come, and we lawyers especially, but all of us Americans especially, must rise to this moment and defend our Constitution and rule of law. Again, it is for the past 250 years we've been the envy of the world because of that Constitution and rule of law. And it's a sacred pillar of the United States of America that's under assault right now. It's saying nothing at all, really, that if we don't rise to this moment to support our Constitution and rule of law, then there may not be another opportunity.
Thank you, Judge Luda. Judge Gertner, I was going to ask you, you all are former judges. Why is an independent judiciary so important?
An independent judiciary is the means by which we enforce rules that are, as I said, fairly determined in advance, changed only by particular processes. And the judge is the enforcer of those rules, the applier of those rules. And it's critical that that function take place, as they say, without fear or favor. In other words, based solely on the law and the facts that are in front of the judge. In just as Judge Ludick just said that the lawyers are the vehicle, because we pledge to an oath to the Constitution. Likewise, judges are the means by which we pledge an oath to the Constitution, and we are the enforcers of the Constitution. So without an independent judiciary, there is no way of enforcing rules that have been duly passed by Congress or duly promulgated by the official authorities. Without an independent judiciary, these would be words on paper and not words in action.
Can I tell a story emphasizing what Judge Gertner said? Because it's so important what she just said, and it was so well said. So this is a story about a man named Walter Dellinger, who recently passed away. But Walter was one of the great American lawyers, great public servant. He was a senior official in the Justice Department several times, and represented President Clinton in a case before the United States Supreme Court. That President Clinton lost that case 9-0. Walter argued the case. He was the lawyer that argued the case. They lost 9-0. He tells the story that he learned of his defeat while he was visiting with some students in Beijing University, some law students. And while he was talking to them, he gets word that you've just lost this case in front of the Supreme Court representing President Clinton 9-0. He announced it to his class, explained that he was the lawyer representing the President of the United States and had lost in front of the Supreme Court 9-0. Walter said the reaction of the students, they were dumbfounded. They could not imagine any circumstance in which the leader of their nation would lose in front of the highest court of the land at all, let alone 9-0. Well, Walter told that story, and he said at the time I heard him tell the story, he said, that was his proudest moment as an American lawyer. His proudest moment as an American lawyer was when he lost a case 9-0 in front of the Supreme Court, because it emphasized the independent judiciary that Judge Gertner just described so powerfully. That's the rule of law. You abide by the outcome that the law demands, whether you like it or not. That's a great point that Judge Gertner just made.
And you count on judges to be fair. You count on judges to do the implementing of it, that they're not As in China's used to be, perhaps today, getting a call from the party leader saying, here's what the outcome should be. The outcome in our courts derive from the nature of the case and the rules applied. And we can count on that. And that goes back to something I think that you said, Judge Griffith, about the importance of we count on the rule of law in our everyday life. We count on the rule of law in the conduct of our affairs and in the conduct of our government.
I don't want to dominate here, but I spent a fair amount of time in former Soviet countries after the wall came down, and American lawyers and judges were traveling abroad to give advice about rule of law, writing constitutions, and it was so inspiring to meet with these young reformers in Eastern Europe, and they wanted to learn everything they could about American democracy, but the part of American democracy that they were most interested in was this one, was an independent judiciary. Separation of powers, checks and balances, yeah, they were interested in that. They were interested, but what they really wanted to know was how do you get a judiciary that's independent, that will stand up to the government, that will stand up for folks on the margin. How do you get that? And we have that in America. It isn't perfect. We can do better at it. But boy, when you tamper with that, when you tinker with that, when you threaten that, that is dangerous, because that's the linchpin of all these other protections we have is the independent judiciary.
Mary,
And we're seeing that now. We're seeing that now. We're seeing that when we hear political leaders criticize the decision of judges and use phrases like, oh, there's a judicial coup going on, or there's a judicial insurrection going on, or
rogue judges.
articles of impeachment are brought are filed against a judge for the decision that she makes, or physical threats are made. These sorts of things are body blows to the rule of law. They're dangerous, and they need to be called out. And so political leaders, lawyers who engage in this sort of language, language has consequences, and this sort of language undermines American confidence in the judiciary and the rule of law, when we ought to have a great deal of confidence in our courts.
I know you wanted to weigh in.
Mary, I was just going to say that to Judge Griffith's point that our Constitution is the greatest charter of self-government in all of human civilization, but the genius of it at its core is the separation of powers among the president, the Congress, and the judiciary. But the president and the Congress had analogs in prior history at the time. The independent judiciary did not. So if there's a gem in this this governmental scheme that we have under the Constitution, it's the independent judiciary, independent and independent of the other two branches, and it alone determines whether either of the other two branches of government are at any given time exceeding their respective powers under the Constitution.
Judge Gertner, I wanted to ask you, do you think judges are experiencing greater threats recently? And if so, why?
Well, there's no question that judges are facing greater threats of a nature that we haven't seen, both the quantity and the nature of the threats. Quantity, clearly, the Marshal Service reports many more threats against judges, but also the threats are physical harm, doxing, attacking judges' family. We've never seen that. There have always been disgruntled litigants, but this is a sustained attack on judges for the decisions that they have made. I won't say cause and effect, but certainly one of the most troubling aspects of this are criticism, something actually Chief Justice Roberts identified, are the kinds of attacks, criticisms leveled at judges from political officials, people who should know better, who are attacking judges, making for the decisions that they have made with which the political official disagrees. There's always disagreement. We have a democracy with robust speech. Disagreement is one thing, but to attack the very legitimacy of the judge, to attack their family, to invite attacks by others is a very different situation. There are now, I believe, there are pending impeachment petitions that are pending in Congress. So this is a dimension of attacks unlike any we have seen before, triggered, as I said, by disagreement with a judge's decision, way beyond the circle of simply disgruntled litigants, including officials and people in positions of power, and significantly people who should know better. So I won't say cause and effect, but certainly that certainly doesn't temper down the temperature here. One judge that I spoke to literally had to move out of his house because the marshals represented that he couldn't be protected in the house that he was living at. We've all seen attacks on not so much the judge, but not only the judge, but the judge's family. So it's a number and dimensions that we've never seen before. And it's not just, there have been criticisms of the Supreme Court and a particular judge. This is really across the spectrum of judges, no matter who appointed them, simply because the challenger disagrees with what the judge said. And this is really very different than we've ever seen before.
Mary, I'll go one step further where Judge Gertner doesn't want to go and say that there's unmistakably a cause and effect between the savage attacks on the federal judiciary and even individual judges and their families today by federal government officials, and the effect of these kinds of threats being made to those judges and their families. In legalese, those attacks are the but-for cause of the threats to the federal judiciary today.
Well, Judge Ludig, I want to follow up with you. Several years ago, Poland fought back against autocracy, and one of the main ways that worked was that some judges left their judicial gowns in the courtroom and they went outside to meet people and to talk to them and tell them about the importance of the rule of law. And I want to thank all of you three here today because that's something that all of you are doing. And Judge Ludig, I wanted to ask, why is it important for you to do that?
Well, of course, I'm retired from the federal bench, as are my two friends here. I don't think any of us or anyone else in America wants sitting federal judges to leave to take up this cause of defending the federal independent judiciary. But for those of us who are no longer on the bench, it's imperative. For this reason, sitting federal judges, of course, cannot defend themselves against these attacks. Well, the politicians have proven themselves unwilling to do so either. And that leaves only people like Judge Gertner and Judge Griffith and I and Judge McConnell and other former federal judges to take up the cudgels to defend our colleagues who are still actively serving on the federal courts.
And Judge Griffith, do you want to say why it's important for you to speak out?
Yeah, because this is a dangerous moment because of all the threats that we're seeing. But I'm motivated by personally, I was so wonderfully surprised and impressed by my experience 15 years on the DC circuit. Because what I saw was judges appointed by every president from Carter through Trump, and all dedicated to the idea that we are trying to apply the law. Now, we had vigorous disagreements with one another about what the law meant or how to apply it. But it was never about, well, how can I help President Obama? Or how can I help President Clinton? Or how can I hurt Trump? It was never about that. It was never about that. And I wish the American people could see that. I wish they could have been in the room where it happened, where I'd see people appointed by different presidents put their partisan priors to one side when they put that robe on and just do the best they can to apply the law. That we don't do it perfectly. No, and it's easy to find mistakes along the way, but we shouldn't give up on the aspiration that what it ought to be and what we're trying to be is impartial justice under the law, as Nancy said, without fear or favor of political party, of president, of senators. You're just applying the law to the dispute before you. Every citizen of the United States deserves to know that when he or she finds themselves in court for whatever reason, whether it's a business dispute or a personal injury matter, or whether it's a claim against the United States, or whether it's defending yourself against charges brought by the government, everyone deserves to know that when they step into that courtroom, they will be treated fairly and impartially, without regard to their race, without regard to their sex or sexual orientation or religion or any identifier. They ought to know that they deserve to know that they will be treated fairly. And again, that's what I saw. I saw that for 15 years, day in and day out, and it just inspired me. And I wish that all the American people could see what I saw. So that's what I'm trying to do right now. Is to let them know it's so much better than you think. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a Pollyanna shit. It is not perfect, and we can do better. But it's so much better than the pundits and the politicians argue.
Mary, to Judge Griffith's point, on this law day, 2026, we especially want to honor and celebrate the lower federal courts in the United States of America, in particular the U.S. Courts of Appeals and the federal district courts, because notwithstanding these attacks and assaults on them personally and their courts, every single one of those judges has honored his or her oath to the letter for the past tumultuous 16 months in the federal judiciary. Again, to Judge Griffith's point, they, of course, have reached different results, supporting this president, opposing this president, but in every single instance for the past 16 months, those judges have honored their oath to the letter, and we need to honor them in return.
Judge Gertner, I wanted to ask you, what can any citizen, not even just lawyers, but anyone, what can anyone do to stand up for the rule of law?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things we have talked about, and I think citizens can participate in this, you talk to your neighbors, you write opinion pieces, you teach your children, you present courses in schools, you write a letter to the editor decrying some absurd attack on a judge. You basically, you as a human being, as an individual citizen, you implement the rule of law in what you do. Talk about it, describe it, make sure that people understand what is going on. And in my personal life, demonstrate. Participate in all the political activities whose goal is to support the rule of law. And I agree with my colleagues that this is a moment like none other. both because of the attacks on judges by politicians, also because of the loosening of sort of the fabric of support for the rule of law by people who don't understand that if tomorrow we became a dictatorship, they would know the difference. And the route from where we are now to that is not necessarily a very long road, and everyone has to do everything that they can to stop it. I also have a story like Judge Griffith has about teaching judges in the former Soviet Union. The judge who was before me was teaching some judges from the former Soviet Union, and she got up and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "the most important thing is to be on time." And I passed her a note and I said, actually, these judges understood the on time part. It's the justice part that they may not have gotten. And I think that that's an important lesson to take. Imperfectly, haltingly, we're all trying to effect justice. And that's something that every citizen has a stake in as well.
Well, thanks for
Can I give a reading assignment to our watching audience here?
Yes,
So
of
for
course.
those of you for those of our friends out there who are political progressives and are distrustful of the Supreme Court, I have a reading assignment for you. Go get Justice Barrett's book and read the first couple chapters. You only need to read the first 3 chapters, okay? And then tell me what you don't tell me, but then you think, okay, what do I think of her? What do I think of her? Okay, now for my political conservative friends out there, I want you to go get Justice Breyer's book. I'm forgetting the name of it. It's a really thin little book. It was written about 5 or 6 years or so ago, where Justice Breyer was appointed by President Clinton. He was on the bench for 28 years, and he wrote lots of dissents. And yet Justice Breyer says the same thing about the judiciary that Justice Barrett says. Even though they come from different political spheres, they say the same thing. They say the same thing that Judge Luty's been saying, Judge Gertner's been saying, and I've been saying. Our judiciary works really hard at being impartial. Now, you can read that stuff, you can listen to us, and you can say, well, those people are crazy. They're crazy, or they're lying. And I guess maybe that's a possibility. People lie. It is true. People are crazy. But when you hear it from so many different people from across the spectrum, people who've been there and who've done the work, I hope it makes you stop and think, and maybe we really do have something precious here in our judiciary. And maybe I ought to be a little more generous in my view about what's going on when I disagree with them. And I'm saying that not just to our listening and watching audience. I'm saying it to the President of the United States. I'm saying it to members of the United States Senate. I'm saying it to members of the House of Representatives and to all the pundits who fill social media and cable and talk radio. That's your assignment. Read those things and then ask yourself, what's really going on here? And I think what you'll come away with, I hope what you'll come away with is what we're all committed to. And that is that the federal judiciary worked really hard at getting the rule of law right.
Well, this has been like a wonderful and necessary conversation, but we're getting to the end of our time. But I have a couple more questions for each of you. The first is, I was wondering if any of you are willing to share like a personal story of how the rule of law has impacted your life or when it had particular significance. And to give you time to think, I'll share my story. My story is I was a trial attorney at the Department of Justice, and I will always remember the first time I appeared in court as a Department of Justice attorney, and I was able to stand in front of the court and say, I represent the United States, because that came with a high obligation to present the facts and the law fairly. And so that was a personal moment for me. Does any of you want to share any little personal story?
Well, I was a civil rights and criminal defense lawyer before I was a judge. And I would walk into court with people that can only be described as either reviled because they were charged with some crime, or disliked because they were a religious or racial minority, or and these were not, this was, I'm old, so these were claims from when these kinds of cases were not usual. And I would walk into court trusting that justice would be done, that it would be fairly considered. If a jury was involved, I mean, I recall believing, that I was initially a skeptic that 12 people could possibly sort out these very difficult cases. And although there was no question that I was a fabulous lawyer, just saying. I became a believer that the court would treat my claims fairly and that the jury would as well. So relying on a courtroom and a judge and a jury to be able to make the most important claims that we know how to make is really, really critical. So I have lots of stories.
Anyone else want to share? If not, I can go to another question, but I thought I'd give you the opportunity.
Yeah, Mary, so the greatest honor of my life was to serve on the United States Court of Appeals for 15 years. And within that greatest of honors was this subsidiary honor, which was that I never, in the conference after argument, when we decided a case, not only did I never hear a single judge in 15 years say anything positive about a political figure who was at issue or had a stake in the interest of the case. Every time there was such a person who had a stake in an interest of our case, judges universally would say something to the effect, I could care less what the President of the United States thinks of us, me, or this court. This is how I vote. Not one single time in 15 years did one other judge say anything different. And over the course of the 15 years, every single one of those probably 25 or 30 judges that I served with said what I just said at least once. So it really goes to Judge Griffith's point that within the court, there is no question whatsoever that the case is decided on the basis of the Constitution and applicable laws of the United States, without regard to the identity of the particular litigants, and especially without regard to the political interest or identity of the litigants.
Well, this is going to be our last question, and I'll ask each of you, but I'll start with Judge Griffith. What gives you hope for the future of American democracy?
So because we've done so well in the trajectory from where we started, we've done so well, we've come so far, and there's so much inertia behind this project. I'm hopeful that it'll keep going. There's a great quote from Frederick Douglass that I wish I could memorize, but I'm going to blow it. But it's from his famous speech about what is the 4th of July to a person such as me, to an formerly enslaved American. And he says something to the effect, he said, I can't believe that the fiat of the Almighty who said, let there be light. I can't believe that has been spent. It's still moving. It's still moving. I'm a person of faith. I don't think you need to be a person of faith to have faith that the ideas upon which this country was founded are good and true, and they're a North Star. They point us in a direction that the better angels of our nature yearn for. And so that's my hope and confidence is we've succeeded before. We've come back from very dark places before, and it's my hope that with leadership of people like Judge Ludig and Judge Gertner, that we will remember and see that North Star through the cloudy night, and that once again we'll reach for that star, and that this 250th anniversary of the Declaration of our Independence will be a good time to remember what we are about, what we've been about, and what we aspire to get to.
And Judge Gertner, what gives you hope for the future of American democracy?
Well, this is a little bit of a self-involved comment, but Judge Ludig and I, who have come from different backgrounds and probably disagree on many things, together with something like 200 and 300 judges, state and federal judges, have been mobilized to write friend of the court briefs in many cases. And the reason why that gives me great hope is that judges are in general, except for the three of us, a very reserved group who, understood that they were not supposed to speak out during the term when they were sitting judges. And even at the beginning of this administration, were reluctant to speak out. And they are reluctant no more. And I think that that is enormously hopeful.
Well, and Judge Ludig, I'll end with you. What gives you hope for the future, and anything you would like to leave our audience with today?
Well, the American colonists, in the Declaration of Independence, but in real time and in a real way, pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors for this United States of America. And I believe that there are more than sufficient number of Americans today who would pledge the same, so that this nation can long endure. That's my hope. For the first time in 5 years, that's also my expectation for America and its future.
Well, thank you for that, Judge Ludig, and thanks so much to all of you. What an important conversation, and I personally can't think of a better way to spend Law Day than listening to the three of you. I want to thank all of you for everything you do every day to speak up for the rule of law and for our democracy, and I thank you, and I think you've done a great service to our country. So if you've enjoyed this program, please go to the Task Force for American Democracy's website at www.democracy.taskforce.org and sign up for our newsletter. We will be presenting future webinars, and we hope you will join us. Our next one will be on June 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we will be joined by Ben Ginsberg and Task Force member David Becker discussing everything you need to know about elections issues, not to be missed. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you so much, Judge Ludig, Judge Gertner, and Judge Griffith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nancy.